This podcast is brought to you by Gridiron Heroics Media.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Gridiron Heroics Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and today is our Thanksgiving Day special. So what that means is I'm going to be joined by three different guests to preview all three of the Thanksgiving Day games. And we are going to kick things off with Ed Valentine from Big Blue View of SB Nation, and we're going to talk about the Giants and Cowboys. It's not the first game of the day, but just due to scheduling, that's the first game that we're going to talk about today. Then we're going to have Sam Goodman from Forward Down the Field podcast to talk Lions and Bills, and we're going to close out the show with Matt Anderson from Daily Norseman. So it's an SB Nation heavy show. And without further ado, let's kick it off. Ed, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Max. Happy Thanksgiving to you and all your listeners.
Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you. All right, so big day of football, man. I love Thanksgiving. There's nothing quite like it. I know they're trying to incorporate it into Christmas, but it's still not the same. It doesn't have the history. Now, the Giants are not the team that is famous for Thanksgiving Day football, but they are kind of one of the major storylines for the year this year. The last time we talked about the Giants was prior to the primetime game last time they played the Cowboys, and we got a feel for kind of where they were. They were on a little bit of a hot streak. We weren't sure how they were going to do against against the Cowboys. We weren't sure if that was going to, continue throughout the season. So they just keep winning. They just keep winning and winning and winning. They have a formula that works for them. And now they have to face a team that beat them earlier this year. So what is the recipe for the success so far? I mean, we know the coaching staff has been excellent. We know that Saquon Barkley has been incredible. But beyond that, do you have any insight into why exactly this Giants team is performing so much higher than expectations?
Well, Max, as you said, they have a formula that they have followed. They're 10 games into the season, and their 7 victories are in many ways very similar. They run the football, they control the clock, they control the pace of the game. They win not only the turnover battle, but they win what you might call the mistake battle. They've played in the games they've won. They've been very disciplined, made fewer mistakes, whether it's turnovers, penalties, blown assignments, whatever. Kept the game close into the fourth quarter, kind of kept the score down, and managed to capitalize on mistakes by opponents to win games in the fourth quarter. The difficulty becomes that not every team is going to make those mistakes, and you're not going to be able to control the pace of every team.
Let me just pause you for 1 sec. I think we have an audio bleed, I think. Do you hear me double?
No, I don't. I hear you just fine.
Okay. It's me. Let me leave this. Just a little bit of audio technical difficulty. I think it's StreamYard. I'm not sure what the problem is, but let me. All right. Test. Okay. No, I'm hearing myself again. Why is that working? Noah, are you hearing me double on everything as well? That's odd. Hey, Noah, can you pop into the stream? Because I'm going to close out and I don't want to lose the broadcast. All right, Noah. So sorry about this, Ed. This is just some kind of funky audio thing with
Technology. It's always fun.
yeah, because I just hear everything you say twice, and then I hear everything I say back in my ear with a delay. So I'm gonna lose my mind. So I'm close out of StreamYard here, and I will rejoin. Noah's also technically a host, so it won't close out.
All right.
All right, if you can get back on talking about the Giants, we can stick with there till Max comes back in.
Sure. We were talking about the Giants' path to victory, and it's a narrow path to victory that includes the things that I was talking about. In the games that the Giants have lost, they've lost the turnover battle, been forced to throw the ball. They've thrown the ball 30 or more times, only 4 times this season. They've lost 3 of those games. So their path is narrow. And the question becomes each week now, how are these games going to be played? So that's really what it is for the Giants is, can they control the pace? Can they keep the score down? Can they keep it close? Will they have a chance in the last 7 or 8 minutes?
Yep. Okay, so we can move into maybe specifics with how that can go into them and the Cowboys today.
Well, the biggest issue for the Giants is going to be that they're on a short week, obviously, and they suffered a number of significant injuries on Sunday against the Lions, adding to players that they're already missing. So in their secondary, for example, Dallas is a team that can put up a lot of points. They're a team with an explosive passing offense. Xavier McKinney, the Giants' safety, is out after an injury he suffered during the bye week. Fabian Moreau, one of their starting cornerbacks, is out. The other starting cornerback, Adoree Jackson, who's their best cornerback, is out. So they're down to a lot of backups in the secondary. They left 4 offensive linemen home who didn't make the trip to Arlington. So their offensive line is going to be shuffled this afternoon, and that's an issue. They lost Wan'Dale Robinson, one of their better wide receivers, from a wide receiving core that's not good enough to begin with. They lost him for the season to a torn ACL on Sunday. So there's a lot of questions about who's going to play and how they're going to be able to put together a secondary, how they're going to be able to put together an offensive line against a really good Dallas defense, and who Daniel Jones is going to be able to throw the ball to. So, I mean, this coaching staff has done a marvelous job for the Giants this season, using the pieces that they have, maximizing the abilities of the personnel that they do have. But can they put all these pieces together in a short week and compete with a Dallas team that's got a deeper roster? I just don't know.
Yeah, it is a good question. A very good question. We know that Dallas is not impervious, but the Giants are dealing with a lot right now, and they're kind of entering the season a little bit hamstrung, to be perfectly honest, and they have done a tremendous job of overcoming it. So when you look at the schedule that they have down the stretch, it's pretty challenging. 5 of their next 7 games are all division games. So they have, thank you very much, Noah. They have the Cowboys today, obviously. Then they have the Commanders, then the Eagles, then the Commanders again. So it's a 4-game stretch all within the division. And they've got Giants, Colts, and then Eagles to close things out. So that's a pretty tough schedule. You know, the Commanders are better than at least for now, they're better than we had thought coming through the first half of the year. The Cowboys are obviously a good overall team, and the Eagles are one of the most well-rounded in the league right now. So do you think that with these injuries, with the initial limited talent base, that the floor might come out a little bit, not necessarily in, a dramatic way, but just in the sense that the wins might not be there to close the season and they might not be able to capture that playoff spot that they're in position for right now?
Max, I think that's absolutely a possibility. Nobody thought that this Giants team would be 7-3, 10 games into the season, heading into this final stretch, which incidentally, this 7-game stretch, if you go by strength of schedule, by winning record of your opponents, the Giants face the toughest remaining stretch of any team in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, nobody thought they were going to be 7-3. They've won games in, as I was talking about earlier, they have a formula, a path that they have followed. They've done a marvelous job controlling games, and they've done a marvelous job most of the time in playing disciplined, fundamental football and not making mistakes. The question becomes, as this schedule wraps up and as they continue to lose key players, can they follow that formula? Can they control the pace of play against teams like Dallas and Philadelphia and Minnesota? And I don't know if they can do that. So I do think that I do think you're going to see the Giants, the pace of their victories slow.
Mm-hmm.
The question at this point, if you're talking purely about 2022 and playoffs, is what's the number? Is it 9 that would get them to the playoffs? Is it 10 that would get them to the playoffs? Those numbers are possible. 2 and 5 would get them to 9. 3 and 4 would get them to 10 victories. But it's not easy because you look at the rosters in many of those games, and the Giants in many of those games would be the lesser talented roster entering those games.
100%. And I think these are big games because they could have a lot of tiebreaker implications. I mean,
absolutely.
The Giants today, the Commanders in the next 3 weeks following, those are both teams that will be likely contending for wild card spots. Now, it's certainly possible 2 could get in from the NFC East, but it's not likely that 3 will. Right. So, however that shakes out is probably going to have a lot to do with that final story. So, last time that we talked about the Giants, it was only a few weeks into the season, so we didn't really have as big of a picture as we do now. And when I talked to Bobby Skinner, he was very high on Andrew Thomas. Obviously, he's continued that. He's been a very good player. Evan Neal had been solid, but he's been hurt now for a little while. So the offensive line was kind of outperforming a little bit based on preseason expectations. Obviously, there was an arrow up from Thomas last year. But how has the offensive line been without Evan Neal?
Well, the offensive line it's a work in progress, Max. I mean, Andrew Thomas is playing at an all-pro level. He's been outstanding. I don't think he's allowed a pressure in pass protection in the last 2 weeks in 70-some snaps, 70-some pass blocking snaps. Obviously, it's disappointing that Evan Neal has missed time. He had an incredibly rough game in week 3 against the Dallas Cowboys, but he had been playing somewhat better. I mean, not in a dominant fashion, but the arrow had been moving up for him. The issue for the Giants on the offensive line is really on the inside. It's at center, it's at left guard. Mark Lewinsky plays right guard for them, and he's an adequate player, but not a great player. That really is the issue. They're going to be on their 4th starting left guard today. Nick Gates is going to be moving in at center for the first time this year. And I might make the argument that that's an upgrade from John Feliciano, but it's still his first start. And it's just tough to especially to run block when week to week you don't know who's going to be playing and who the guy is that's going to be next to you. So it's a difficult situation. It's definitely not a finished offensive line, and these injuries are not helping.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And this is a Cowboys pass rush that got pretty hot last week. So they have DeMarcus Lawrence coming from one side who can, shift inside and do some stuff. They've got Micah Parsons who they can send screaming in off the edge on either side that they want to. And, if they put him inside, he can still beat lesser guards as well. So I am a little bit concerned about that. But again, that's not the recipe for the Giants' success, dropping back and just letting pressure come screaming at them. They want to run the ball. How effective do you think they can be doing that against this Cowboys defense?
Well, Max, statistically, that favors the Giants today. The Cowboys are one of the poorer teams in the league when it comes to defending the run. The question that you have for the Giants is, with all of the injuries on their offensive line, can they run block effectively? Can whoever they're putting out there on the offensive line work together to pull off some of these blocks that Barkley's going to need? As great as Barkley is, he can't do it alone. The other thing that the Giants have been doing in recent weeks is they've been using a lot of the extra offensive linemen that they have. They've been taking their tight ends off the field, and I've never seen it before, but they've been playing 8 offensive linemen at times. And instead of 3 tight end packages, they've had 8 offensive linemen out there. And I'm not sure they can do that with the personnel that they've got. They signed an offensive lineman off the practice squad yesterday. They're elevating another offensive lineman off the practice squad to be a backup today. So I just don't know how well all of that's going to work out. But if they can run the football, they control the pace of the game, they neutralize that pass rush to an extent, and maybe they keep their defense off the field a little bit. So that's really the path for the Giants. It's been the path all year, and it's especially important today. If they have to drop back and throw the ball 40, 45 times, it's just Daniel Jones is going to be under duress. Mistakes are going to get made, and it's not going to look pretty for the Giants.
Okay, I got you. I see our update from Noah that the Cowboys have quite a few players. So illness apparently this year is just subtext for probably COVID, right? Because I don't think that we've ever seen it quite to this level, with just illness as opposed to COVID. So I assume that that's what the issue is, but that includes DeMarcus Lawrence, Terrell Basham, and Dante Fowler Jr. So it looks like a lot of those defensive linemen that I was just referencing may not be available for this game today, which definitely makes a difference. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because we hadn't had a full picture last time we talked about the Giants either, are about the rookies. Kayvon Thibodeau had not taken the field yet at that point. So now that he's back, what has he looked like? And what have the other rookies looked like? It's a meaty class. You have 7 picks in the top 4 rounds. And so you definitely had contributions from some. We just mentioned Evan Neal. Daniel Bellinger had that unfortunate injury. He had been playing a fair amount before he went out with that, but he should be back relatively soon. So what are your thoughts on the rookie class as it stands?
Well, I'll get to Thibodeau in a minute, but the other injury that's really unfortunate is to second-round pick Wan'Dale Robinson. Obviously, the Giants have had a need at wide receiver. They lost Sterling Shepard for the season. They've had Kenny Golladay has disappointed again, and Sunday against the Lions, Robinson, who missed a little bit of time earlier in the season with a sprained MCL, Robinson stepped up. had 9 catches and 13 targets. His first 100-yard game as an NFL player, really started to look like the player that the Giants were hoping for when they drafted him, a guy that they could get the ball to and who could make things happen with, once they got it into his hands. And now he's lost for the season. So, and Neal has missed time and Bellinger has missed time. In a couple of their later round draft picks never made it to the starting line because they suffered season-ending injuries in training camp. So it's been a little bit of a disappointment with the rookie class overall, just because a lot of them haven't gotten to the starting line as often as you'd like to see them. So it's been kind of hard to judge and kind of hard for them to make progress. But when it comes to Thibodeau has been good. Thibodeau has been impactful in a lot of ways. But what Thibodeau hasn't done, if Giants fans were hoping that Kayvon Thibodeau would be their answer to Micah Parsons, that he would be a star, that he would dominate games, that he would require a double team all the time, we haven't seen that yet. I don't know if that's the way Wink Martindale is using him. Wink Martindale kind of insinuated the other day that a lot of the way he uses Thibodeau is to create distraction and create openings for some of these blitz packages that he uses with guys from the secondary and other linebackers and such. But Thibodeau has only the 1 sack. I think he has only 3 quarterback hits. So he's not showing up in the splash play department, in the big impact play department as much as Giants fans might hope. He's, like I said, he's been good, but I think that the Giants fans are looking for more.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I understand the sentiment. I understand the hope, but any expectation that resembles Micah Parsons is probably setting yourself up for some level of disappointment, because coming in with that kind of performance, with that kind of statistical output as a rookie or a second-year player, it's highly, highly, highly uncommon. It takes a lot of these edge rushers a year or two to really, get where you want them to be. So I hear you, but I wouldn't stress too much about that. There's plenty of time for him to develop.
No, it's you're right. It's probably an unfair standard to hold him to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Giants fans, though, were hoping for, Azeez Ojulari, for example, came in as a second-round pick last year and set the non-Lawrence Taylor Giants rookie sack record. And I say non-Lawrence Taylor because when Taylor was a rookie, sacks were not an official statistic. So Ojulari technically holds the record with 8. And I think that Giants fans were hoping to see Thibodeau at least approach that number. And right now it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Like I said, I think he's a good player. I think he can be a force off the edge. I hope that we see a few more splash plays from him down the stretch. That's all. I think especially on a day like today when the Giants secondary is so beat up. I mean, I wrote the other day at Big Blue View that at cornerback, they're down to the backups because you're down Adoree Jackson, you're down Fabian Moreau, Aaron Robinson, who was a starting cornerback, is out for the year. So you're down to the 4th, 5th, 6th options at cornerback.
Yeah, so that is a tough spot for them against a passing attack that, it's pretty talented, pretty deep, especially every single week that Michael Gallup is back. Any single week could be the week that he goes off and kind of makes his presence truly felt again. Right now, he's been a little bit more of a not decoy, but he's just kind of been there threatening you deep a little bit. He hasn't really had a big game, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised against the Giants defense the way that it's looking right now in terms of injury status. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about at this point, and I have to assume that the answer would be no, but the Giants are not looking at Daniel Jones as a long-term quarterback option right now, right? Do you think there's any chance that he would be back next year as a holdover? Do you think that they want to dive right into the draft? I mean, what are your thoughts on what they want to do with that position now?
Well, that's an interesting question. At the beginning of the season, I wrote and I said that I thought odds were against Daniel Jones being back next year. The problem that the Giants have right now is they've won a decent number of games. They'll probably win some more games. They're not going to be in position in the draft to get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or Will Levis, one of those guys that's going to go in the top 10. They're not going to be in position to get one of those guys without making a significant trade up. And I don't know that they're in position to make that trade up with all the other needs that they have on the roster. I don't know that they can afford to give up 2 or 3 number 1 picks or a boatload of day 2 picks to move up. So they're in a situation where I think the ideal thing for the Giants at this point would likely be a short-term deal for Daniel Jones. I think that's the path that you might see. A short-term deal, maybe a 2-year deal, something, 2 years, 30 million, something like that, not high-end quarterback money, sort of low-end quarterback money, but it buys the Giants time because we've seen that with Jones at quarterback, with this coaching staff, there's a path for them to win games. I still think Jones' passing numbers could be better if the Giants could just give him a better group of wide receivers, a healthy group of wide receivers. My guess at this point is that's the path they're going to take, is to try to keep him short term. If you want to call that as a bridge until they're in a better spot to go out and get a quarterback, maybe you can call it that. But that's my guess at this point as to how it's going to play out.
So it brings up an interesting conversation, and it's certainly not the time for it right now, but the offseason will be the place to have this, and maybe we'll talk again when this comes around, because there's an argument that some people make that what you want to do is you want to build your roster when you're in the middle of a rebuild or starting a rebuild. You want to build your roster and then get your quarterback and drop him into place, whether that's via draft pick or veteran quarterback elsewhere. The Bills did that relatively successfully with Josh Allen, and Brian Daboll, as we know, does come from that organization. But you also face the distinct possibility that you will build your team and then you will draft your rookie, and then he will either take a while to develop or not be good at all, which is what we've seen with Zach Wilson and the Jets right now in New York. So whether Zach Wilson turns into a player or not almost doesn't matter in this moment, because the team is so good that they are playoff caliber with better quarterback play. And so they are basically forced to put him on the bench to satisfy the rest of the team who want to win games. So if the Giants don't go after a quarterback now, by the time they build the roster, it may be challenging for them to find a player who is immediately impactful enough to help them win. So again, it's not a question we can answer right now, but when you look at the different outcomes of that strategy, it does beg the question, do you want to get your quarterback and let him develop while you build the team around him? Use free agency not for big name players like Kenny Golladay, but for a lot of middle tier to slightly below middle tier players to round it out. And that way you can justify using your draft picks on a quarterback and build more over time. So it's an interesting question. It's obviously quarterback is always an interesting question if you don't already have the guy, which is most of the NFL at this point. But let's go ahead and pick this game because we have Sam Goodman from Forward Down the Field podcast coming up here in just a minute. So the spread on this changed ever so slightly from 9.5 to now +10 for the Giants. It's a fairly large spread. I don't know if this necessarily reflects all the illnesses that just came out because it is creeping into the Cowboys' favor. So, maybe you can potentially, earn some money here if you want to bet this without necessarily knowing the exact health status of all those guys. But what would you say is the outcome of this game? Do you believe the Giants will cover the spread? Do you believe they'll outright win it? Or do you think this is going to be a substantial Cowboys victory?
Well, it's funny, Max, because this is exactly what I said earlier in the week. If you're betting the money line, there's no way that I can bet the Giants to win this game. I just can't do it. Not with what they're dealing with, not with the fact that they lost at home to Dallas earlier in the season when they were healthier and when Dallas had Cooper Rush at quarterback. And that was at the beginning of Cooper Rush's run at quarterback. What I said earlier in the week was, if the spread got to double digits, I might put some money on the Giants to cover. So that's how I look at it. I think the Giants have got a shot to cover. If they can play this game reasonably close to the way they want to play it, they can keep it within 10. Every Giants game, well, all but 2 Giants games this year have been 1-score games. So I think you can take the Giants to cover. But I think taking them to win is a big ask.
Yeah, I also can't. The Cowboys they're volatile, but they're not volatile enough that I would take them to lose outright. 10 points is a healthy spread though, and so I will take the Giants officially as my pick 'em for the week for them. 10 points it's definitely not unreasonable, but I have seen enough out of Daboll and Kafka and Wink Martindale to believe that they will keep the game close. Now, there's always a possibility that they're in scoring distance and they decide not to kick that field goal because they want to score, and then you just miss the 10-point spread because of that. But I tend to think that even with a banged up team, they will do just enough to cover a 10-point spread. All right. Ed, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it immensely, taking time out of your holiday to come on the show. Why don't you let everybody know where they can find you on social media and all of your work?
Well, the website is bigblueview.com. Twitter is @bigblueview. We also have an Instagram page, a YouTube page. So pretty much anywhere you guys are looking for Giants information, you can find a Big Blue View outlet to satisfy your needs.
All right, beautiful. Thanks again, and we will talk, if not before the season ends, absolutely in the offseason once we decide what the Giants are going to do with all of the money that frees up and how they're going to rebuild the roster. It's a very interesting conversation to me personally. But
all right, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right, let's bring on Sam Goodman. Sam, how are you doing today, my friend?
Man, I cannot complain. It's Thanksgiving. We got Lions football. I mean, what better pairing is there? I mean, it's just a great day. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love football Thanksgiving. I talked about it before we started the other segment, but it's something special. There have been a lot of years where I've had to work during it or whatever the case might be. This is not the year, so I'm going to hunker down and watch a lot of hours of football with my family. We have not talked about the Giants or the Lions on the show yet so far this year. Since I talked to you and Ben earlier before the season started with a preview and some Hard Knocks chat, we haven't really talked about them. They had a rough start to the season. They seem to have turned things around a little bit. They fired their defensive backs coach. Not sure how much that necessarily had to do with it because it kind of seems like everybody's playing a little bit better now. But around that time, things did start to change. They're on a bit of a winning streak, and they have to play a very, very good Buffalo Bills team right now. So what do you think is the difference between the early part of the season and this part of the season? Is it just experience? Is there a major change in the coaching strategy? Because again, firing one position coach, I don't think is changing the outcome for the whole team.
Yeah, and I mean, firing Aubrey Pleasant wasn't like the biggest turnaround either. You know, the secondary is still like the 23rd worst or 23rd best pass defense in the league. It's below league average, and they're playing a little better. But I think really what it was is it's a young team that lacks a lot of experience, like you just said, and the coaching staff also lacks experience, right? I mean, Dan Campbell was a head coach who was never a coordinator. He had an interim head coach experience in Miami, and that's kind of the highest position he had before coming to Detroit. So I really think that him learning on the job has also been a big factor, right? Early in the season, there's multiple games. The Minnesota one really sticks out to me, where the Lions were in a position to win it and didn't manage the clock well, didn't utilize their special teams well, and then got caught in a bad situation with injuries and some bad personnel, and because of that, lost games that they really should have won. That and the defense just could not perform, especially late game. Now they've gotten some players back. The rookies, especially because it's such a young team, are starting to step up more. Hutchinson's starting to develop more. The defense is starting to gel a little bit, and they're starting to piece some of those things together, which is translating into this 3-game win streak.
So, how have the rookies looked up to this point? You know, we had a very big game from Hutchinson early. You know, people kind of thought, okay, wow, he's breaking onto the scene immediately. Got quiet a little bit. I think he's playing a little bit better again now. I believe he had an interception last week, if I'm not mistaken. So, how would you say that the class has played entirely? And then to follow that up, when do you expect the receiver to get on the field? His name is escaping me right now.
Jamison Williams, yeah.
Williams, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty happy with this rookie class, right? I mean, I think Brad Holmes has done a phenomenal job in the draft, especially. But Aiden Hutchinson is a guy who he's not necessarily showing up on the stat sheet every week in like a very major way, but he's doing a lot for this team with a lack of help on that defensive line, right? So he's facing a lot of double teams, and he's still managing to create a lot of pressure. But the thing that really showed me kind of how far he's come already in such a short time is his IQ is really developing on the field. You'll see it kind of while he's playing too. One half to another can be completely different from him. He adjusts as he plays, which is phenomenal. There are situations, and Ben, my co-host, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, did a little film breakdown when the Lions played the Bears. Jeff Okudah had a game-changing pick six, and Ben broke it down and was kind of saying that this was exclusively to do with Aiden Hutchinson's play and not really Okudah, because Aiden Hutchinson had a really big problem at the beginning of the season over pursuing quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are a lot faster at this level than they are in college, and because of that, he was missing a lot of tackles in the backfield, lost some sacks because of it, and he was just, honestly, he was looking goofy back there. And, now he's starting to play a little bit more with a contain and playing more to his skills. So he sets the edge, doesn't let Fields escape in this situation. Fields goes to turn back. There's already pressure there. The play's broken down. He lobs it up, and Okudah's able to find the ball. It's a situation where, a rookie I don't necessarily think is going to make that play very often. But Aiden Hutchinson he's so smart, and he learns as he's playing, and because of that, he's able to adjust very quickly to the high-speed game, to the NFL level, and make game-changing plays like that, where he's not necessarily showing up in the stat sheet, but he's definitely involved in what's going on.
Yeah. So, but how about some of the other rookies that came in? Because it was, a fairly large class, and again, the second first-round pick, Jamison Williams, hasn't seen the field yet, but just in general, how impactful do you think they have been?
Well, yeah, I mean, most of this core is really young, and a lot of them are getting significant amount of playing time. So, Jamison Williams is expected to come back against Jacksonville. He was out running routes on the field before during warm-ups today. I'm real excited about him. He's game-changing, especially in this offense. Should be awesome. But another guy that's really impressed me has been our third-round pick, safety Kirby Joseph out of Illinois, because he was a transitional corner, transitioned from corner to safety, played one safety year in college, and was pretty good, but he showed that he needed some time still to develop. Brad Holmes did not really expect him to fall to that position. They were happy they grabbed him, but he's kind of a development piece, right? But Tracy Walker, our starting safety, out for the year, tore his Achilles, and now Kirby Joseph's thrown into this situation, which for a guy who's a rookie, who's already transitioning into that position, that's a really tough ask. And he's had some really weak games because of it, some miscommunications and stuff like that. But he's also come up big many times this year. He's got multiple interceptions. He's causing turnovers. And that's not something the Lions have really had on this defense since Darius Slay. It's been a team that doesn't really make big plays, and he's been helping them get off the field on third down. And those are really big turning points for this defense because it's been the biggest issue, especially in the beginning of the season. I think he plays a lot better when he's out there with Deshaun Elliott, our other safety, because he's got a veteran in there with him to kind of help him out, make sure he's not having those rookie mistakes, those miscommunications. But he's shown flashes, and I think with time he will really develop into a starting safety and maybe a top-end starting safety in this league for years to come.
So how about Malcolm Rodriguez? You know, the hype was there in the preseason, and I think he's actually played pretty well. He was questionable to play last week, and I believe he got in there and was impactful. So what has been the story on him ever since we last followed him on Hard Knocks?
Yeah, Malcolm Rodriguez is a guy who, I mean, everyone in Detroit absolutely loves him, right? Because he's high energy and he fits the bill of what the Detroit Lions are trying to do so well, and he was a Hard Knocks sweetheart, so everyone loves him. But he had also some really solid performances at the beginning of the year at a position the Lions are very weak at. You know, linebacker is a very talent-dead spot for the Lions right now, especially coverage linebackers. And Rodriguez was showing out at the beginning of the year. As of late, he started to dip off and show maybe why he was a sixth-round pick, right? I mean, he's undersized. He doesn't always break blocks and can't necessarily make the biggest impact outside of the tackles because he's slower, right? And he also does not have the greatest coverage abilities, which were the biggest flaws in his scouting report. And so because of that, you know, it's become quite apparent that, you know, linebacker is a position that the Lions need to address, whether it's in free agency or in the draft at, you know, more of a higher value. Because Rodriguez, though I think he'll be a great rotational guy in the future, I don't necessarily think he has the physical tools to be a long-term starting linebacker in the NFL.
So I see that his snap count has gone down substantially. Do you think that's because of play, or do you think that's because of injury? Basically, in week 9 and week 11, which are the last 2 weeks that he played, he's dipped under 40% of the snaps for the first time in any game that he's played this year.
Yeah, I think partially what it is the injury, right? You know, he was getting a lot of snaps. He's a guy who likes to stay in even when he's feeling a little sore because, again, he's got that driven mentality that the Lions like. But when he started losing some playing time with injury, Derek Barnes, who is, you know, in his second year and another kind of project piece at linebacker for the Lions, started to step up a lot in the same areas where Rodriguez was thriving, in the run game, in between the tackles. But he showed a little bit more of an ability to break blocks and get to the running back, get in between guards. And I think because he's a little more physically gifted, you know, he's larger, a little quicker, he's been able to make a few more plays in the passing game that have shown the coaching staff that Rodriguez isn't quite there yet. So, I mean, you know, it's such a toss-up again in this room where it might just depend on the matchup week to week who they're going to play because, as I said, it's such a weak unit. But Rodriguez is, again, he's physically limited. And so I think making sure, especially as a rookie, to manage the situations he's put in is a big thing for Kelvin Shepard and the coaching staff because of the fact that, you know, you want to put him in situations he's going to succeed in, and those at this point don't look to be very common, especially with the way they're drawing up this defense. It's been tough.
Well, I think, you know, because teams have been able to throw on them, teams have been more likely to throw than run the ball. And again, that doesn't necessarily match up the best with Rodriguez's skill set. So, you know, the more passing plays he's forced to be in on, the less of a situation he's put into to succeed overall. But the book is not written on him. He's just been a fun story. The last rookie I do want to talk about is Jameson Williams. When exactly do we expect him to be back at this point? I mean, I think around the offseason, he was saying some pretty crazy things like he's going to be ready to start the year. But we all kind of knew that might not be how things went. The more realistic expectation was at some point in November, he might be ready to come back. And we've kind of hit that point. So what's the inside track on Williams? Do they think that he is going to be ready to participate this season? And again, even if he comes back, he might not necessarily be a high impact player, but we all want to see what he looks like, right?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just in terms of coming back, right, we projected him to come back around this game, Bills versus Lions, Thanksgiving. Storybook-wise, it's perfect, but also in terms of, his injury, right, we're not, especially at the beginning of the year, we didn't want to force a guy to come back when we're not, outright winning a ton of games and in a position where we're really making a push. And especially an injury like that, ACL tear, he's a rookie. You don't want to, jeopardize his future. But yeah, Jameson Williams didn't really get any updates from the coaching staff forever, and Dan Campbell is very vague about injuries. We talk about it all the time on the Forward Down the Field podcast because we always want just a clear yes or no answer. We never get one. And then last week we were finally told he's getting his practice window activated and he's finally starting to return to play and practice. And so it looks like he is going to play next week against Jacksonville. That's what it really seems like to us. He's been practicing, running routes. He's going full speed in practice too, which is the big thing. It's either next week or the week after because he's physically ready. It's just a question of, playbook-wise, meshing with Jared Goff and the other receivers, fitting in the scheme. But he's coming along, and I'm very excited to see him on the field.
So once he does come back, what does that make the starting trio of receivers at this point? So Amon-Ra St. Brown's in the slot. Jameson, maybe he's not even – I assume they'll give him the start technically, but who knows. But either way, he might not play a high snap count. But, so he would, I assume, be the Z, right, as a flanker. And then how does that round out?
Yeah, I think Chark would be the third guy in that group just because – Chark's kind of one-dimensional, right? It's run down field and catch a jump ball. Amon-Ra St. Brown is kind of the gadget guy who can do it all. And then Jameson Williams is going to bring that extra speed that helps stretch the ball a little bit more. Jared Goff doesn't necessarily have the tool set to throw it downfield very well. It's kind of a loft ball he puts down there. And it's anytime he throws the ball downfield, I'm sweating because I think we're in jeopardy there. But yeah, Jameson Williams, right? He is a really fast guy. That's his thing, right? He's got the speed. He's a great route runner, and that's something that the Lions don't necessarily have right now. Josh Reynolds is their best route runner in terms of a downfield threat, and he's not necessarily a guy that I personally want to have out there on a majority of snaps. And so with Jameson Williams coming back, I think he fits in the sense that we can run some better deep crossers, deep comebacks, stuff like that not necessarily target him, but open up the field for Amon-Ra St. Brown because right now he's been locked down quite a bit by zone defenses because as long as you stick a single high safety above DJ Chark, you're kind of set on that side of the field. And there's a lack of depth at that position too, so there's some very limited things the Lions are able to do right now in the passing game. I think Jameson Williams opens up a lot of that.
Well, 100%. I mean, he has rare speed.
Yeah.
We do know that. And so prior to the season, I know Lions fans aren't going to really love hearing this, but I was a little questionable on him in terms of physicality because you can be a smaller receiver, but it's kind of the attitude that you play with. I mean, you see that with a guy like Chris Olave, a slender player, not the biggest guy, but very physical at the catch point, very aggressive at the catch point, and he'll play against press, the line of scrimmage. He doesn't care. I felt like you can get tricked into thinking Jameson Williams is potentially a very physical player because he played on special teams, but it's very different when you're screaming down the field and you can hit a guy who's trying to catch a punt, You know what I mean? Who's not
Yeah.
looking at you. It's very different when you're trying to engage as a blocker. You're trying to fight off press coverage. I felt like he was a little bit hesitant to do that because you look at the pretty well developed route running and the ridiculous speed, and I understand why people would say he was maybe the best receiver in the class. But I worry going up to the NFL level if he wants to be as physical as I would like to, and maybe he will learn to do that. Maybe he'll realize that he just doesn't have a choice. I don't know, but that's the one thing that I would want to keep an eye out once he does get back. How does he engage with physical defenders, especially in the run game? Because I think that not that you need every receiver to be a dominant blocker, obviously, but I do like to see them make the effort, and that was questionable at times. You know, he had some patty cake blocks that I remember from Alabama, but once we get through this season, if they can win a few more games, I think playoffs are kind of out of the question at this point. Technically, no, but probably yes.
We'll be realistic, yeah.
Hey, look, you never know. But we get through the season. There's some more to be excited about. And you go into next offseason, and you have to be very excited. It has to be one of the more fun off seasons in a while for a Lions fan. Because obviously, high picks, you get the Michigan guy in the draft. You know, this is different because you may have a top 5 pick to add to a team that is already on the rise, as well as the other picks that you have. And so I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I would be very excited if I was a Lions fan.
Yeah, you have to be, right? I mean, there's going to be cap space to play with for the first time in years, honestly. This has been, I mean, ever since the Bob Quinn, Dan Patricia era, it's been a team that's just like wasting contracts on bad veterans. We're still paying off like Jamie Collins' salary and stuff like that. Michael Brocker's contract is massive. So we're going to have a lot of money to play with. And so I think because of that, people tend to look at the draft value and think, that's where we're going to address most of our needs. But when we're talking about, we have a corner 2, but we need a corner 1, right? We can draft a corner 1, but we need more depth at that position and at linebacker, maybe at safety, right? Those are all things you can address in free agency, and there's great. You can get anyone when you have a lot of money to play with. And the Lions have like $106 million that they're going to be able to work with, that's an exciting number. Plus the high draft picks, again, 2 first rounders, a pretty high second rounder if everything shakes up how it's been. And really the one thing that concerns me is the quarterback position, because I don't know if I'm sold on Jared Goff. I don't know if the coaching staff is, and because of that, the Lions have kind of thrown their way out of with these wins out of a position to not necessarily draft one of the 2 quarterbacks in this draft that I necessarily would want, but they can make a move and trade for him if that's what they so choose to do. And if not, you can wait, because you can advance this defense with the amount of cap space they have, the draft picks, and that really seems like the point of necessary addressing. I mean, it's a rough core, and just a few more guys, especially linebacker, get a faster coverage linebacker, a little more depth at corner. That wins you maybe 2-3 more football games, and then we're talking playoffs, right? So they're at such an exciting point where I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do. But there's also a little bit of worry in me, because as a Detroit fan, as a Detroiter, we've had a lot of free agencies and drafts go pretty astray. But I'm pretty happy with the Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell era so far. So
yeah, I would be. I mean, you look at the full body of work, getting out from under a lot of those contracts, the self-scouting to be aware of what your timeline is realistically, moving on from Matthew Stafford, getting a number of future picks back, banking on the possibility that the Rams might not be good in at least one of those seasons, getting Jared Goff back to help you at least evaluate your roster offensively and keep you in games while you're getting to the point where you get your quarterback. There's a lot to really, really like there. And you can have all the money in the world in free agency. I don't think going after the high price players is really the way to do it for the most part. I mean, the Jets are one of the teams that I felt like most effectively used a fair amount of cap space over the past 2 years. And most of the players they've gone after have been second tier or less players, but they've gone after a lot of them, and a good number of them have worked out. and even the ones that haven't, again, the investment, the salary is not that high. Probably the highest investment they've made in a free agent player in terms of like near or at the top of the market has been a guard, and he's the one that didn't work out. So I just think that middle tier where you're adding a lot, like volume versus perceived quality, is probably the way to go for them. And then you do look at the draft picks. It may not matter how well the Lions play this year because the Rams might play themselves into a high enough pick to draft a quarterback just there.
Yeah.
So right now they're slated to pick 6th overall. They just lost to an incredibly banged up New Orleans team. So at this point of the year, it kind of seems like their season is more than lost. It could be potentially very, very bad. So, again, it's exciting. I would be very happy. Last thing before we get out of here, and we're going to welcome Matt Anderson here in just a minute, but let's pick this game. The Bills are 9.5-point favorites. They're playing at the Lions, a place where they played last week already. Now it's a short week for them. They had a big win over the Cleveland Browns. I think talent-wise, there's really no question that the Bills are the better team at this point, especially when you have to take into account the Lions' defense. But do you think that they can cover a 9.5-point spread?
The Lions are a team that are always going to keep it close, especially under this regime. But they've shown time and again that they're going to keep it close in the first half, kind of lead us on thinking, oh, maybe we have a shot in this game. And then the third quarter, they come out so weak on offense. The defense starts to get exhausted. And I think it's such a tough task against the Bills offense, one of the best in the league, one of the most dynamic, missing a lot of key players on this defense, Jeff Okudah, Charles Harris, Josh Pascal. I think there's just no shot that the Lions are able to keep it close the entirety of the way through. I think the spread, you can flirt with it, but I think the Bills should be able to win by 10 here. I think if they don't, that's kind of an issue. I think the only thing that really plays into effect is Ford Field's got 66,000 fans, the largest attendance since like 2015 on a Monday night. It's going to be loud, and I hope they bring that energy, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think the Bills are able to cover here.
Yeah, I'm going to make the same pick as well. I think the Bills can cover a 9.5-point spread because it doesn't have to even be a blowout for 10 points. You know what I mean? And last week we saw it with the Giants, the Bills with the Browns. Excuse me. Bills came out a little flat. They were not. It kind of looked like they might be getting into their third game of a losing skid, but they just turned things around. The offense got hot. There just wasn't enough that the Browns defense could do. And then running the football can only get you back in games so efficiently, and the Bills just kept throwing the ball. So, I think that they've gotten back on track after a week of rallying around their adversity, which was playing in a different field. Now they're pretty familiar with Ford Field. Yeah, there weren't 66,000 Lions fans screaming there, but still, they know their surroundings a little bit better. And they're just an incredibly talented team. I think you have to realize that. So that's my pick as well. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. It's been nice to see you guys. You guys just started Forward Down the Field podcast this season, so it's been nice to see that develop. I'm happy for you guys. And it is a shame that we couldn't have Ben on. Initially, he said yes, and then I went and changed the schedule on you a little bit. So sorry about that, Ben. Sam, let everybody know where they can find your podcast, where they can find your work and your social media.
Yeah, so as you just said, we started up this year, and we're seeing a lot of growth. So I just want to thank everyone for that and say, hop on the bandwagon now. But the Forward Down the Field podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts. You can find it really anywhere. Google Podcasts too. We're at FDF Podcast on every bit of social media. We're big on Twitter, Instagram, those two really. I'm at Sam_Goodman18. Ben, my co-host, is at BosherBen. So give us a follow there, interact, check it out, and I hope to see you guys, hopping on the Lions bandwagon before we go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, man. Thanks
Appreciate
again,
it.
and we will talk to you very soon.
Have a good one.
All right, we have Matt Anderson of Daily Norseman to
Hello.
preview the final game tonight. Matt, how are you doing today?
It's been a whirlwind. I'm kind of taking my setup here to my parents' place, so I'm hoping everything audio wise is working. Um,
Yeah, you're good.
but yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited and ready for tonight's game just because we just need to get Sunday's game out of our mouth. It was rough to watch.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the tone last time. I had Luke Braun on. I
Okay.
had him on to talk about the Vikings prior to the season. I had him to preview a primetime game early in the year, which, if I remember right, I believe that was the Philadelphia Eagles game.
Oh.
So that was that was the one game where, things had kind of not been great for the Vikings. They've been on a really nice streak since then, up until last week, and they're looking to get back on it. But because that was so early in the season, there was a lot of like, well, we don't really know, you know what I mean? Is this a good team? Is this an okay team that's just won a couple of games? What are we expecting? Are the Packers going to turn things around? Well, we've had a good length of season to see the Packers are probably not turning things around, and this is
Yeah.
probably the Vikings division to run away with at this point. The question is, how has their season primed them for a playoff run? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where the Vikings are. Some of the most key players. Obviously, there's very, very notable ones like Justin Jefferson that everybody knows. But from a Vikings writer perspective, who are those guys that have made this season what it is so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a variety of players. I think first and foremost, Patrick Peterson's kind of resurgence this season has been spectacular. Outside of maybe last week, but I think everybody kind of gets a pass for last week. Um, there's been some other good guys too. I mean, Zadarius Smith. I know we signed him, and people expected, you know, him to be a good part of our defense, but to the level that he's playing, first in the NFL in pressures, I think he's like fourth or fifth in sacks right now. He's just been on a tear, and he's been everything this team could hope for and more. When you switch to the offensive side of the ball, it really just has been the Justin Jefferson show. Kirk hasn't looked spectacular, but he's making key throws in clutch situations, which is a big reason why the Vikings are sitting at 8-2 today. The offensive line has played for the most part really, really well. Again, outside of last week, Christian Darrisaw has proven that he's probably going to be an all-pro elite tackle in the NFL for years to come. And then Ezra Cleveland has been playing really well at the left guard position. Garrett Bradbury, who was a big concern for this team, has played pretty serviceably at that center position. I think the biggest issue on the offensive line currently is Ed Ingram, but it's a rookie at a right guard position. And so I think most fans are giving him a benefit of the doubt to hope that maybe he can improve.
And even if not, that's a position where you can find somebody else to start at some point. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
if there is a need to have one guard, it's probably the place that you want to have it.
Yep.
It's aside from running back, there are not a lot of positions where you can just find guys kind of that readily available, whether it's a day two pick or a mid-level investment in free agency. So
Yeah.
their offensive line's coming together pretty nicely. I like that they've made the investment. They got themselves Brian O'Neill a few years ago, got him re-signed, so he's around for the long haul. They got their first-round rookie at left tackle, and that's a really big deal. I think you get yourself good tackle play. You might have to try a few things, but usually you can figure out the rest. And
Yeah.
Cousins, man, he is just so frustrating to not even a Vikings fan, just because he's so streaky. You see him just have these games like against the Bills where he's just putting the ball out there. You know what I mean? He's just giving his guys opportunities.
Yep.
And then you've got these games where it's like if he just doesn't see it, then he tries to. I mean, sometimes he tries to create out of the pocket, doesn't necessarily go the best for him, and sometimes he's like, I'm not even messing with this, And so, you don't necessarily want to mess with the success that they've had from a winning perspective, but when you look at what gets it done in the playoffs, the elite quarterback play, you'd like him to just be a little bit more, maybe even a little bit more risky. Maybe that's even the right way to put it. But defensively, Zadarius Smith has been awesome. I mean, now that he's fully recovered from injury, he's a very good player. Again, this is one of those players where you don't necessarily know how long that's going to last, but like, don't get super high off of this season and necessarily give him a huge contract, because sometimes this is a major outlier in an older player's career. But this year, there's no denying how impactful he's been. So, if you were to look at a position on the roster where you're like, okay, it's getting by right now, but this might be an issue when we get to the playoffs, and it's probably something we want to address going into the offseason, what do you think that would be?
I think it's kind of been the story for a while, and I know Mike Zimmer is probably a little sad that he's not here because he advocated for this position so much, but I still think it's cornerback. It's just a lot of unproven players at that position. Cam Dantzler has shown flashes. I think at Caleb Evans, when he's played this season, granted he's a rookie, he's shown some flashes. Andrew Booth just hasn't been able to stay healthy, so I don't think we know what we have there. And Patrick Peterson is getting older, so I mean, I think when you look at the offense or the defensive side of the ball, it's got to be cornerback for me. But switching to the offensive side of the ball, I think the biggest need is honestly a legit wide receiver opposite Justin Jefferson. And I've said this on my podcast a ton of times, and I know other people have floated it around as well, but the Vikings did not do a very good job looking ahead at the wide receiver position. And they always kind of thought that Adam Thielen would be okay. And he is. Adam Thielen is a good, capable receiver. He's still productive. He's still getting open. Like, I'm not here to suggest that he's bad, like, at all. But I think when you look at the NFL and across some of these elite teams, they have a nice 1-2 punch at wide receiver. You look at Cincinnati, right? You got T. Higgins in Jamar Chase. Like, that is elite company down there. And so I think when you look on the offensive side of the ball, I'd probably go wide receiver this offseason. And defensively, I think corner it's probably got to be a need. If not corner, they may look at linebacker or defensive line.
So so first of all, one of the great assets that Justin Jefferson brings to the table is ability to play from anywhere. He can play X, Z, slot, static, or you can have him moving pre-snap. He can do literally anything. But, to get the best three on the field, what would be your perspective? Would you want to move Adam Thielen into the slot as probably some of that athleticism starts to decline and you rely on the route running and the physicality at the catch point, and then insert another more athletic guy on the outside opposite Jefferson? Are you in favor of moving on from Thielen entirely? What are your thoughts on that outside of just bringing in a guy?
Yeah, well, contractually, I don't think that we can get rid of Thielen. I think it's just going to cost too much. I think his dead cap hit is pretty expensive, so he'll be here next year, barring something crazy. I don't know. I think my perspective's kind of changed on it a little bit just because with the addition of T.J. Hawkinson, that is a nice opposite weapon for Jefferson, but I still think there's a need for a more athletic guy on the outside, to your point, to go along with Jefferson. Thielen still can line up outside. And I think that's what's great about him. He's got a lot of versatility still at his age. He's still winning routes. He's just a little bit slower. Kevin O'Connell is the mastermind in this offense, and I trust him implicitly at this point to kind of place guys where he thinks they're going to do the best. We haven't seen the statistical seasons that we've seen from Thielen this year, but who knows? Maybe that comes. Maybe that's how they respond to some of this pressure that they saw last week in the Cowboys, and they're bound to see tonight versus the Patriots.
Yeah, that's an interesting matchup, and we'll touch on that here in just a second. And please, for the love of God, please just beat them in primetime. It would make me so happy. So I just want to touch on the quarterback position a little bit more from your perspective.
Sure.
So, I think from the outsider perspective, it's always easy to say, yes, you want to try and find that elite quarterback. But, do you think that obviously they're pretty well locked into that contract, at least for the time being? I think they could trade him if the return was viable. But again, what is your other option if you're trading him? But what are your kind of big picture thoughts on the quarterback position and how Kirk fits into that?
Yeah. Well, first off, as far as trading Kirk goes in the offseason, he'll have to approve it because in this last contract extension, he added back in a no trade clause. So
Right.
everything would have to go through Kirk at that point, and I don't see him waiving it for many teams. I would be surprised if he waived it. I think he likes his situation here. I think he likes the coaches. Um, but as far as like the future of the Vikings quarterback room, I mean, it's tough. I think again, something that the last regime kind of failed to do is potentially groom somebody who could eventually take over. Now, you could say they tried to do that with Kellen Mond, and that just did not work at all. Um, but I think there's a case to always be kind of drafting a day 2, day 3 quarterback, as long as you have an established starter. And so I think that's kind of the route the Vikings could go. Now, I've talked about this with uh, some buddies as well. We don't know what Kwesi's going to do this offseason. We've seen him be aggressive. So for all we know, he could be like, okay, Kirk's in a contract year next year. Let's throw it all at, let's trade up. Let's go get one of these guys like a Bryce Young, like a CJ Stroud, the kid from Florida who might drop down a little bit, maybe into the teens at the current
Richardson.
moment. Yep, yep. So maybe Kwesi does that. I would be open for that because I do think Kirk with Kevin O'Connell is better than what we've seen Kirk in the past, and we're seeing it on the field this season. Statistically, not the greatest, but he's making he's feeling the pocket really well. He's making really tight throws, and you pointed it out earlier in the show. He's taking aggressive shots, which we have not seen here in Minnesota since he's arrived. So I think I think right now I would describe Kirk as a bridge quarterback, and I feel like that's doing him an injustice a little bit. Um, but the
Be
Vikings,
a
I feel
very
like
good bridge quarterback.
yes, I do feel like the Vikings will be addressing it soon. Um, if once the offseason hits too, the Lamar Jackson trade rumors will be swirling as well. So who knows?
Yes.
Maybe Kwesi goes big there and tries to go get Lamar Jackson.
hmm Ultimately, I just don't think that the Ravens move off of him because
They'd be
as
dumb too.
wise of an organization as they have proven to be, they know the value of the position and they know what he brings to the table. So
Yeah.
I think that contract stalemate will eventually get to a point where he's signed. They do have the franchise tag in their bag. I think they'll work it out. The main reason I'm talking about Kirk Cousins is because proactively, this is a contract year for him. It voids after 2023. So this is really when you have to make a decision on it because
hmm
you can't go into 2024 not knowing what you want to do to some degree because you can't put a franchise tag on Kirk Cousins in this situation. He's already had two technically, so the third one
Yeah.
would be very, very expensive and probably just not even a realistic possibility for the Vikings. So they need to decide in the 2023 offseason, is this time for another mid-level extension, or is it time to try and draft a guy? And we haven't seen enough from Kwesi to know what his mentality is on the whole thing. Probably it will depend on how the rest of the season goes in the playoffs too. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them get aggressive because he is 34 years old at this point too.
hmm
So he's still got playing years, but we've seen a drop off relatively quickly,
Yeah.
and from other players at that age, especially guys who don't already have pretty remarkable physical gifts as well.
hmm
And um, I have a tendency to think that we might be looking at a future quarterback sooner rather than later. And I don't think investing a mid third round pick on a guy is necessarily, going to get it done. So probably you're looking at something higher. Now, it is a good class for those day 2 quarterbacks. So that might be what we're looking at here um, for the Vikings, whether it's a Richardson, whether it's a guy who's injured now and so might slip in the draft a little bit in Hendon Hooker and look to try and develop him a little bit with Cousins for a year, see what he's got, and then roll that through to the next season. But that's all speculation now. But I always tend to be a little bit forward looking with these teams because the team building process is what I'm so interested in. To
Yeah.
be honest, the salary cap and drafting side of it. So before we get into this matchup,
Yes.
is there anything else that you want to just throw out there about the Vikings team as it stands? Either something that's not talked about enough in the mainstream media, or something that you just have a big point. You're like, this is a, a Matt Anderson statement that I want to make.
Yeah. That's a tough one. I think the only thing that I'll say here is I think we're going to see a lot more Dalvin Cook down the stretch here. Um, I think we've seen hints of it, and they went away from him way too early in last week's game. But I think they were strategically kind of holding him back in the beginning part of the season. But man, these last few games, especially in Buffalo, um, he's just playing with a lot more like burst and speed that we didn't see in the early part of the season. So I guess my hot take is Dalvin Cook could make a legitimate threat to being the best player on this team heading down the stretch as teams maybe look to try and eliminate Justin Jefferson a little bit more. Um, so that's probably what I got there.
So basically what you're saying is, in the response to having to find an alternative to Justin Jefferson is one of their main offensive pieces, you think Dalvin Cook is likely going to be that impact guy?
I do, and I think you might see it tonight because if you well, I can let you transition to it and we can talk about it.
Okay, so the New England Patriots, they just keep winning, and it's very, very frustrating. Uh, I I last week was wild. So for those of you who don't know, which is probably just you right now, Matt, I'm a Jets fan. So last week was a absolutely brutal finish to the game. Was it totally unexpected? No, it was not totally unexpected. By the time they had gotten down to less than a minute with uh, only 3 points on the board for either team, it just seemed inevitable that something was going to happen in Belichick's favor, whether that was going to overtime and the Jets blinking first, or in the final 5 seconds of the game, the Jets blinking first. You kind of felt like that was going to happen, and it just kind of always feels like that happens with Belichick. I mean, they made it to the playoffs with a rookie Mac Jones last year, which nobody expected.
Hmm.
You're halfway through the season, and they're the worst team in the AFC East, and nobody expects them to go to the playoffs. And now, once again, they're they're making moves, and they put themselves in playoff position. Now, I will say it's a very tough closing stretch to the season for them, no doubt, starting with this primetime Minnesota Vikings game, but they just have a tendency to get it done. So when you immediately look at this matchup, what is the first thing that stands out to you in terms of, this is something that the Vikings do well, that the uh, Patriots are going to probably effectively be able to take away from us, because that's just what they do?
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at this game, the thing that scared me the most was Bill Belichick, because everybody knows Bill Belichick will take your best weapon away, and our best
Mhm.
weapon is Justin Jefferson. So that scares me right off the bat. And then you combine in the fact that their defense is one of the best defenses, if not the best, in the NFL today. And
Mhm.
so when we look back at last week's game versus the Cowboys and just how that offensive line got manhandled by Micah Parsons himself, and now you switch to this week, it's a short week. You're without your elite left tackle, Christian Darrisaw. Um, and now you're going against the NFL sack leader, Matthew Judon, with 14 sacks. And it's not just him either, right? I mean, uh, they have I forget his name, Wise Jr.
Dietrich Wise, yeah.
Dietrich Wise. Yeah, he's also right up there. I think they're one of the best pass rushing duos in the NFL, actually, ironically, behind Zadarius Smith and Daniil Hunter. Um, but yeah, this game actually has me a little bit nervous, and I know Viking fans are hoping for an easy win here this evening. But the Patriots defense is no joke, and Bill Belichick will find a way to get rid of Justin Jefferson in this game. I don't know if he'll completely eliminate him, and Kevin O'Connell will have to get a little creative. But that's why I say look for Dalvin Cook tonight to really help set the tone early, get him going, maybe reduce some of the pressure that they're gonna unleash on Kirk Cousins in this offensive line. And then hopefully you can kind of get those other key components in the game. Adam Thielen, like I said, he's been open. He's just not really getting the targets. TJ Hawkinson, he had a rough game on Sunday. And so hopefully he can forget that one, make some key catches and really help out this offense. But it's going to be a close one.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the entire Patriots team is on the injury report. It always seems to be the case. Then you just never really know who's going to be participating. It is fortunate that you're looking at no Christian Barmore because he's an impactful player on their defensive line as well.
Yep.
But they've got others, like you said. Wise has been making an impact. Judon has been dominant this year, which of course he was. Of course he is. But so last week, Garrett Wilson had been on a really nice stretch, right? He'd been putting up a number of high yardage games, over 100, and followed that up with over 90. He's had a number of good games throughout the year. So you're like, okay, without Breece Hall, this is the guy that would be their best offensive weapon. So this is the guy that you can expect them to take away. So you're really going to have to get something going in the run game to account for that.
Yep.
Well, the Jets have certainly a banged up offensive line, but they only average 2.8 yards a carry, and that's even with Zach Wilson's scramble attempts, which at least in this game, were actually plus plays. So they could get nothing going on the ground. So how confident are you in the Vikings offensive line in generating some run game?
I'm confident at the moment. I mean, what is it? It's 11 a.m. my time, so I'm confident right now. I think that Kevin O'Connell is creative enough, and I know people they're gonna talk about the fact that Kevin O'Connell played for the Patriots. They drafted him. He knows Belichick a little bit, right? Got to sit in a lot of those meeting rooms. Granted, it's been years, but I think Kevin O'Connell might have a little bit of an edge to know maybe some of Belichick's tendencies, not all of them, but maybe some. And maybe he can try and exploit that in this new age offense that he's trying to create for this Vikings team. So, we might see a lot of jet sweeps. We might see a lot of screens just to try and get, alleviate some of that pressure that we're seeing. But at the moment, I feel pretty confident with Dalvin Cook getting his fair share tonight. Last week against the Cowboys, he rushed right down that field and was averaging like 5.8 yards a carry until the game kind of got out of hand and they just stopped going to him. So he's elusive. He's very good after contact. He's got the speed to get to the outside, which can, churn 3-4 yard gains pretty easily. So I look for the Vikings to do that tonight. And if they can't, then that's going to be, they're in for a world of hurt.
Conversely, the Patriots offense can get absolutely nothing done. So I don't know if Kevin O'Connell has some insight into Matt Patricia's offensive scheme or if he would ever even need it because their offense is pretty terrible. The Jets defense is granted very, very good. And they had a valiant performance, holding them to just 3 points throughout the entire game. Obviously that final score coming on in special teams. I don't know if the Vikings defense is quite to that caliber, but I think they're certainly good enough to hold up against this Patriots offense. So the question really will be, what do the Vikings bring to the table offensively to get it done and walk away with a win? So last question I asked before we pick the game, do you buy into primetime Kirk Cousins versus not primetime Kirk Cousins? Do you believe that that's a thing? Do you believe with the spotlight that matters for him? Or do you think that it's more coincidence? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, coincidence would be like just a couple times. I think his record in primetime is abysmal. I don't have it in front of me, but I think he's only won a couple of games. But at the same time, I mean, it is a team game, end of the day. And as much as I do believe that Kirk maybe feels a little bit more pressure in primetime situations, we've seen him, deliver some pretty cool performances as well and just come up short. I think I've mentioned this game a lot of times, but it was back in his first season with the Vikings, and we had a Thursday night game in LA and versus the Rams, and it was a shootout all night. And Kirk was, going back and forth with Jared Goff back then, and I think each team had like 30 plus points, and so I know he can deliver. So I think it's a new Kirk Cousins this season, even though we've seen him, not play well in 2 primetime games so far this season. I think tonight's a little bit different for some reason. So I'm not going to buy it tonight, but as a whole, I do kind of believe it.
Well, it's hard to dismiss entirely,
I
but
know.
I will say this. I mean, that game against the Bills was probably as close to a primetime situation as you could generate. I mean, I think it was broadcast primarily
everybody.
nationally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, I think that comes into play as well. Players are aware of that kind of thing. So, that's a good sign.
One quick note on the primetime situation with Kirk Cousins. Kirk is very habitual. He has his routine and it's very consistent. And so I think with the primetime games, when you just shift it a little bit, it just throws his routine off and he just can't quite get into a rhythm. And that's honestly what I think it comes down to.
I tend to agree with you, actually. Yes, I was thinking about that myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we played this game, if we had like the 11 o'clock game on Thanksgiving, I think Kirk would be great because he would get in that kind of routine. It's the night games. And so that's what I think is a big factor in Kirk's, skiddiness in these prime games.
Look, I'm over 30 now, and the nights don't go like they used to for me either. I mean,
No.
you get to like 11 o'clock, and I'm like, I've got 2 kids, and it's like I'm, did whatever I did during the day. It's not even that late. Don't necessarily even feel tired, but as soon as I sit back, like I'll fall asleep sitting. I'm already that guy, and he's 2 years older than I am. So yeah, he's probably in better shape, but things just change. But yeah, no, I do agree with you on that as well. And again, I don't know if it's game of the year because there's a lot of really good games, but I will tell you, I enjoyed watching that game immensely versus the Bills. That was a great game. So let's pick the game. We're coming up here on the end. We have the Vikings -3 right now against the Patriots. They are playing in Minnesota. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that the Vikings cover this game? Do you think they win outright? Do you think that Belichick brings just enough schematically to stifle them? How do you think they get out of Thanksgiving week?
Yeah, I like I said, I think it's going to be a close game, and I don't think Viking fans tonight are really going to enjoy watching this game with their families. But you pointed it out, right? There's no doubt that the Patriots defense is good. But the Patriots offense is bad. And so I think that's where the Vikings can kind of find an edge. I'm looking for the Vikings defense to put us in some pretty good field position, maybe force a couple turnovers. And I'm not saying we'll come away with touchdowns, but if you're turning the ball over the 30-40, maybe you can snag some field goals. The only thing that concerns me, and you guys saw it firsthand last week, is special teams. The Vikings special teams has been pretty good for the most part all season, but Bill Belichick kind of preaches, having good special teams, and they have an elite returner, again, like you guys saw last week in their win over the Jets. But I think that might be the difference maker. If they can continually put themselves, the Patriots, in good field position, that could hurt us as well. I look for a boring kind of back and forth game tonight. And I think the spread is probably pretty close. I do have the Vikings winning, but I don't think this team score more than 20.
I could definitely see that. I mean, special teams played a huge role, obviously, with the closing, but it wasn't just that. I mean, it required a tremendous amount of consistency from the Jets special teams to even get to where they were. I mean, they forced, if you include repunts from penalty or whatever, I think they forced the Jets to punt like 12 times in that game, something insane like that. And you have to hold up with that, or else the game isn't 3-3 at the end of the. So you really have to be on point with that. So that could definitely be something to keep an eye on tonight, no doubt about it. And I think, part of it is that they will always be in it no matter how bad the Patriots offense is, as long as they don't turn the ball over. That was something where we saw a very near turnover for them, where it was debatable whether he had the ball for 2 steps and fumbled or it was an incomplete pass. Ultimately, it was ruled incomplete. That would have changed the game, right? So if there is a little mistake here or there from that Patriots offense, that could be enough to seal the deal for you. But if they play maybe not good or explosive, but at least mistake free, that keeps them in the game. So if the Vikings can generate a turnover, if you can get a strip sack from Zadarius Smith, if you can get a pick from the veteran Patrick Peterson, if you can get that to happen, then I think you have every opportunity to win the game. So, in the spirit, I don't even know really who I want to pick, but in the spirit of having you on, I'll make my official pick the Vikings to cover -3.
Let's go.
And maybe I'm just optimistically hoping that the Patriots walk away 1 win fewer as we go into next week. But all right, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I absolutely appreciate your time on this holiday here today and being a part of our first official Thanksgiving Day special. Please let everybody know where they can find your work, where they can listen to you, and where they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. So you can follow me on Twitter at @MattAnderson_8. You can find my writing over on DailyNorseman.com, as well as our podcast as well. Our podcast is through Climbing the Pocket and Daily Norseman, but if you go over to our YouTube page, Climbing the Pocket, you can find Vikings Happy Hour, which airs live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central.
Beautiful. All right, man. Thanks again, and best of luck to the Vikings. We'll
Thank you.
talk to you again very soon, I hope.
Yes, for sure. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, everybody. We will be back on Sunday to pick the Sunday slate of games. We shall see what the rest of the schedule brings to us, but it should be an excellent week of Sunday football. And then we'll be back on Monday, of course, to recap everything as well. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Big thanks to Noah Ashley, our producer, especially stepping into the host chair for a minute there. And we will see you all very soon.